Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. This is the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got Ray Fittipaldo. We got news to talk about because the Steelers have made some coaching changes. What are they, and are they enough? That's the big question. Also, rumors that the Steelers might be looking elsewhere other than Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, or is that just a ploy? We'll discuss both of those and the potential return of Naji Harris, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by one of our great Steelers beat writers, Ray Fittipaldo. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And today's episode, as always, is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injured victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, Ray. Let's talk about some news here. The Steelers have announced that they have signed a new defensive backs coach, or slightly new, Gerald Alexander. Of course, Gerald Alexander was their assistant defensive backs coach in 2022 and 2023 under Grady Brown. And now he spent 1 year as the safeties coach for the Raiders, and now he's back with the Steelers. Grady Brown, though, was a person who was, had I think some very obvious contributions to the team this past year, at least culturally, because he was the one that started the turnover t-shirts that they did throughout the season, when guys would get different colored t-shirts, was they racked up more turnovers throughout the season, and it was something that led to the turnover culture, and they did become one of the best turnover teams in the NFL. But miscommunications in the secondary were a big issue all season long. Well, more so in the back end of the season, but they were something that never got truly fixed and something that got talked about a lot. Do you see this as a mistake for the Steelers, or do you think this is just, hey, this is them trying to change things up because of those problems late in the year?
Yeah, I mean, you got to trust that Mike Tomlin knows what he's doing here, and I know a lot of people. Chris got on social media yesterday and said, what are the Steelers doing? Grady Brown's one of their top young coaches. Whose decision was this? Well, this was Mike's decision. His contract wasn't renewed, and I think you hit the nail on the head. How many blown coverages did we see late in the season, and actually throughout the season, Chris? I mean, you go back to Indianapolis and Dallas. It was an issue that never really got fixed. And really, I don't know this for sure. Only Mike will be able to address this the next time we talk to him. But Aaron Curry was part of that too. I mean, Patrick Queen was the hub of the defense. The communication between the second and third levels of the defense really were off all season. So I don't know if both those guys were scapegoated, but it certainly seems like those issues that were ongoing throughout the season that were never fixed. It looks like it cost Grady and Aaron Curry both of their jobs.
Yeah, and when I was thinking about it, because at first, you look at the Grady Brown, he is a young coach. He was supposedly interviewed by the Falcons for their defensive coordinator job, so he's getting looked at for those types of things. Aaron Curry, we talked about when it was announced that he was going somewhere else, that hey, we didn't. Yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise, but at the same time, when you put it together, who are the two units that play the most off-ball coverage in the Steelers that led to those problems? And it was the linebackers and the defensive backs. And so maybe that was maybe the Steelers, Mike Tomlin said he was going to do a year-end review and they were going to assess what went wrong in the tail end of the season. Maybe this is telling us what the Steelers found when they were looking over the whys and the hows at the end of the season, as far as why things fell apart, especially on defense.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Mike Tomlin, I think, tries to bring in some young coaches sometimes and give those guys opportunities. But this was Aaron Curry's first real position coach job in the NFL. It was Grady Brown's first job in the NFL. Grady came from the college ranks. So, I give credit to Mike in some ways that he's trying to uplift these guys. But, in the end, Chris, you got to do what's best for your football team. Gerald Alexander had previous NFL experience before he got to the Steelers. We'll see what they do at linebacker. But, sometimes experienced coaches do bring more to the table. Every coach needs a start, but sometimes, and it certainly seems this way for the Steelers, sometimes you need a guy that is organized and, can make all that stuff with the communication work. And like I said, maybe Alexander will be the answer in the secondary, and maybe they'll go the same route once they announce their new inside linebackers coach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be the big question is like, how do they announce who they announce as their linebackers coach, but also what's going to be the role of these guys, of the new secondary coach, Gerald Alexander, and what's going to be the biggest task? Because another thing to me, Ray, is whoever's the new DBs coach, and maybe they also need Anthony Midget was the assistant secondary coach last year. Do they need someone who specifically can be working with their corners, especially Joey Porter Jr., because to me, Joey Porter Jr., he's still a solid guy. I think he still has a lot of room for potential. I think we've seen that. He just has to make it more consistent, but that's got to be like priority one. Maybe prior to two after the communication things, but big priority for the Steelers is getting Joey Porter Jr. to be that CB1 that they drafted him to be. And, we saw, through Hard Knocks and just through, talking to those guys throughout the past couple of years, Grady Brown was really close with Joey Porter Jr. at the end of the season. He was talking about his challenges and how he needs to step up next year. And Joey Porter Jr. was accepting that. And we saw so many times that, when Joey Porter Jr. would be off by himself working, Grady Brown was testing him left and right, doing this, doing that. And, Joey Porter didn't have a terrible season, but didn't have a good season. I think he had a kind of middle of the road season where he had lots of penalties, and didn't take that second year leap that a lot of people were looking for. They need someone who's going to help him get that third year leap and eventually turn into that CB1 that can, that CB1 that can maybe not take away all, wide receiver ones, because Patrick Surtain doesn't do that, but just be a really good cornerback that allows the Steelers to be more aggressive.
Yeah, he's the number 32 overall pick in the draft, and you get him at number 32, but you don't have the benefit of that fifth-year option because he was the first pick in the second round. So we do have to see a big step forward from Joey in this next year, because then they're going to have to consider what they do with his next contract after the 2025 season. So I agree with you there. And I would also add, how does Gerald Alexander get Minkah back on track? I mean, it's been an ongoing issue for 2 years now. We'll see if Alexander has any influence there. Maybe he will. Grady could get after you as a coach, but I thought he was a little bit on the quiet side, more of a teacher than a yeller. Alexander's going to get after you. I don't know if you remember him from his when he was here on the practice field. He is going to put you in your place if you screw up. So, again, reading into things, maybe Mike wanted a little bit more of an authoritative guy, a guy who's going to get these issues corrected. I would categorize Alexander as more of a fiery type of coach. And, when you compare him to Brown, certainly more so when you look at him in that regard.
And I do wonder this too, because, one thing that, when you look at Minkah's numbers, Minkah Fitzpatrick's best years were when the Steelers had corners that he didn't have to really back up all the time. And this year he spent a lot of time playing behind Porter or Jackson or Beanie or Cam, kind of just playing that actual safety role where he's literally the backup and not playing as much aggressive coverage where he's trying to fool quarterbacks in the middle of the field, and not making excuses for him. But I wonder if that's part of what the goal should be this offseason, if not only developing Joey Porter Jr., but investing to go get that cornerback too. That's not, Dante Jackson was solid before his back injury, but maybe they need a guy who is another guy that you can count on to win. You look at what the Eagles did in the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. Their corners smothered their playmakers, and not just Darius Slay. Quinyon Mitchell was taking things away. Cooper DeJean, I thought he could have been a Super Bowl MVP. I look at that trio and I'm just like, man, I think that there's a lot to learn from the Eagles and how they won the Super Bowl. And the corner, defensive line's one, but cornerback's another, not just outside corner, but slot corner as well. I know Beanie Bishop had a solid year, but he's not like Cooper DeJean where he can just run with whoever all across the field, make big plays and things like that. Yeah. I think that should be another key point for the Steelers, because if they get that down, maybe Minkah Fitzpatrick does get to be more of a playmaker again.
Yeah, Chris, to me, that's the unfortunate part about this offseason for the Steelers. They have so many needs. They are so far behind where the Eagles are. The Eagles invested in their defensive line first, and then they added Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, and then Cooper DeJean in the second round. The Steelers aren't at that point yet. So there's all these puzzle pieces that, eventually could fit, like you're talking about with Minkah. But, if you're Andy Weidel, do you address corner in the first round now, or do you go with the trenches? I mean, his history tells us he's probably going to address the trenches first. So maybe it's a free agent acquisition. Maybe you spend big, get a top flight corner in here via free agency, and you try to fix it that way. But when I look at this draft still, and I see the numbers of defensive linemen that are probably going to be early contributors and maybe even first-year starters, to me, I still think you address the D-line first in this draft.
I agree, and we've talked about that a lot. We'll continue to talk about that as we look at the NFL draft. Why we think the Steelers are going to be prioritizing D-line in the first round and maybe some other rounds as well in this draft class. But we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to Ray about some of the rumors we're hearing on the Steelers quarterback situation. We'll talk about what's real and what's not. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injured victims answer that very questions. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the question, what's next? Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I want to talk to you about the Steelers quarterback situation. We've seen rumors floated out there nationally, guys talking about the Steelers might be considering other quarterbacks other than Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. That could be their future. And then there's also talk about, Aaron Rodgers. He's, potentially, the Jets are moving on from him. Could he be in the mix here? I'm sorry, Ray. I don't buy none of that. That is, to me, that is Omar Khan working the phone lines to try to get some news out there so that when he sits down at the negotiating table with whoever's Justin Fields' agent, that they're going to be like, hey, so we have other options. We really want to go. We can go any way, but we like you, so we're going to give you this offer here, and that way they can lowball Justin Fields a little bit in these negotiations. What's your read on how this is playing out right now?
Yeah, I mean, just talk about some of the guys. I mean, if you're the Steelers, do you really want to start over and go with Aaron Rodgers, who's 41 years old and who comes with a lot of baggage? I mean, you could say the same thing. I know there's been some trade rumors out there about Matthew Stafford. Do you really want to start over with a quarterback his age, even though he's a few years younger than Aaron Rodgers? But yeah, to me, it makes all the sense in the world, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. You keep some continuity within the offense, and you go from there. So they would obviously spend less on their salary cap if it is Justin Fields. But hey, listen, if it's Russell Wilson, the way he played at the end of last season, he's not going to command $30 million from the Steelers. And if he wants that, it's not going to be with the Steelers. He's going to have to go elsewhere and find it. So I think the good news is, Russell Wilson does want to come back. So if they really want to get that done, they can get that done. And you look at Justin Fields' situation, if they make that, if that's their determination, they go to him and say, hey, listen, you're our guy. We're not going to go back to Russell Wilson. Then I think it's a more, desirable place for him to be. He knows he'll be a starter, and then he can actually get some decent money. Maybe let's say 2 years, 28, 30 million, whatever that number would be, about, 14, 15 million a year. I think you could do that, structure it in a certain way that if he struggles, you can get out from under it, and then you go from there. So if you're the Steelers, I think it makes all the sense in the world, Chris. You keep some continuity. Now the only thing we don't know, we'll probably find this out at the Combine or shortly thereafter, is it going to be Russell Wilson or is it going to be Justin Fields? That's the next piece that has to fall into place.
It does have to fall into place, and they need to figure things out now. I get the sense that, as much as Mike Tomlin talks about mobile quarterbacks, that now he's had a chance to look at both of these guys, and that Russell Wilson's had his chance, and he's not tied to anything. When the Steelers signed Russell Wilson, there was this sense that like, hey, like, you're going to be the guy, and there's no promises made to anyone now. Where it's like, okay, you know what, you're both free agents. Whoever gets the sign, like that's who they're going with here, and I think that might have played a role into how they wanted to do things last year. They signed Russell Wilson, and then Kenny Pickett wanted out, which led to them trading him away and then trading for Justin Fields. And it was one of the biggest quarterback flip up, I think, in my time ever seeing the Steelers do it. And even before covering it, that was just insane of a switch. And now you're sitting here, it's like, okay, now you're settled. You're not committed to anyone. You haven't made any promises. You're not trying to uphold anything. Now it's just picking who do you think is best for your locker room. And as you and I have been talking about, I think not only is Justin Fields the best option there, but I think they feel that way. But again, to your point, there's competition for Justin Fields. Like there's also there's also plenty of those rumors out there and reports that like, hey, Justin Fields is going to have a good market in the NFL free agency. And that, whether or not that's true or not, that's definitely Justin Fields' agent kind of working the phone lines in return, being like, hey, I don't care. We don't care who else you're talking to. If you're thinking about Stafford or Rodgers or Cousins or whoever you're thinking of doing, Justin Fields is going to get a decent paycheck next year. And so I do think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because to me, the Steelers, you don't want to overpay for your quarterback next year, but you don't also want to end up with someone that you really don't want to have in your quarterback room next year.
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit harder for the agent of Justin Fields to pull that off, because it was only a year ago, Chris, that all the Steelers needed to do was give up a 6th-round pick for a former first-round pick. So, I know the free agent quarterback market is a little bit thin this year. I know Justin's probably one of the top guys, but I think that's a harder job for his agent to pull off, considering his circumstances.
Absolutely. Something we'll continue to monitor there. But something else that we got from our team over here is that the Steelers might not be done with Naji Harris. I want to talk to Ray Fittipaldo about that potential and what that could mean for their plans in the offense and for free agency in the draft this season. We'll get to that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, we'll remind you the show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci, the Umesity Leoma and his bestest lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, our guy Jerry Dulac had an interesting news tidbit recently, and he talked about the potential return of Naji Harris. That's not something I thought I would see come across the docket as a thing there for the Steelers here. Saying, Jerry saying don't close the door yet on Naji, and that there's some interest that the Steelers have here. And this was kind of where I was, considering, how, for the Steelers as a whole this year, like you just said in the last segment, the Steelers have so many needs right now. They might need help at guard. They definitely need to replenish the defensive line. They need to replenish cornerback. They need to replenish wide receiver. And when you're doing, and you still need to sign your quarterback, all those different things. And there's other things they could probably add to as well. Running back just feels like the extra thing that they're going to, that if they're looking at that this year, like that could be a pick. That could be another defensive back. That could be their slot corner that they get this year. If they try to get their running back in the 2nd or 3rd round this year, that could be the D tackle they want. That could be the wide receiver they want that they really liked at the Senior Bowl. And running back, I think there's some good running backs in this draft class, but can you try to do it like you did Jaylen Warren, take it even later in the draft class? But if you do that, do you want to come into next season with Jaylen Warren and a low draft pick as your only running back options? Najee Harris, 4 years and 4 years with over 1,000 yards rushing. He knows your system. And it continues to make me look back at this past offseason and saying, why didn't they go with the 5th-year option, which would have kept him under $7 million as a contract this year? And then you could have decided what you wanted to do. Do you buy into this? Do you think that Najee Harris could actually come back to the Steelers, or is this just kind of just, is this something that they're exploring right now that could be that probably won't come to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could think of, Chris, I mean, you make some points about the draft. So I guess, if we talk about what you said, I mean, it goes back to the debate of roster building. And, this is a really good draft for quarterbacks. Do you really want to, let's say you're in the 2nd or 3rd round, okay, and the best player on your board is a running back. Do you really want to pass him up because you have Naji Harris? I mean, that to me is where you have to start, especially where the Steelers are. You have to start picking the best players who are available. I don't think you want to limit yourself because you signed Naji Harris to a 3-year, $24 million deal, or whatever it might be. So there were a lot of complaints last year about Naji not having any juice, doesn't break any big runs. It's not going to get any better.
Right. He's not getting younger.
Yeah, he is who he is. He's a between the tackles runner. He's not very effective on those pitches. Doesn't break big plays. I mean, to me, if you want to bring him back, okay, maybe bring him back for $5 million a year, but that wouldn't stop me from drafting a running back in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. That's just where I am right now. And I don't think you have to do it on day 2. I think you can get a starting caliber running back to go with Jaylen Warren, maybe 3rd round, but probably 4th or 5th round too. This is a loaded class. And I think what you hear from the draft analysts a lot, you're probably not going to see a lot of these guys other than Genty go in the 1st round, but then there's probably going to be a run like on day 2. When does that run happen? Does it happen in the 2nd round? Does it happen in the 3rd round? What's going to be left in the 4th round? I think that's what GMs are trying to figure out right now. But to me, if you're a GM with this draft class and you have one to take in the middle rounds, I'm taking them. I don't care if I sign Naji Harris or not.
And that's an interesting place to be for the Steelers, because here's the other thing, you could re-sign Najee Harris for like a 2-year, 1-year deal, whatever you're doing there, and then have Jaylen Warren, but then also have that younger player ready to go on your roster, and then you have a better 3-man maybe you have a more athletic 3-man rotation than you did with Cordero Patterson, and that's something the Steelers, if they want to be good at running the ball, maybe they need those guys, maybe they need guys like that, but I think that's part of what the consideration is here. But we've looked at this draft class, and we're going to have our full breakdown of the draft class and where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, in this year's class. But looking at the running backs, I do think that there's chances maybe in the 4th round if the board falls. And here's the other thing: the projections right now, as I say to everyone every year, the projections in January and February rarely hold up into April and May. Things are going to change. But like right now, like if you were to project as a guy that could fit in that range that you're talking about, Ray, Devin Neal out of Kansas would be, an ideal option there. But, does Devin Neal run a 4.3 at the combine, and then all of a sudden he jumps up as to a 2nd round pick? Does that change things? Is there a bad physical that turns something into it? Are there other guys that step up like Brashard Smith or Damian Martinez out of the ACC? Trevor Etienne, is he a guy that could be like that? There's so many questions that you can't truly account for right now. That can lead to it. But, to your point again, there are guys, and I think there's also explosive guys. Like you're talking about Najee Harris not having juice. There's plenty of guys with juice in this draft class, guys with speed, explosive, that can hit the home runs. And, having that with a tough runner like Jaylen Warren, that could be enticing for the Steelers.
Yeah, and let's bring this up, because if you want to talk about smoke screens like we were last segment, what if Omar Khan's trying to get some leverage with Jaylen Warren, and they want to do business with Jaylen Warren on a long-term deal, and this is maybe their way of saying, okay, we're gonna give you this offer because we have options as well. And just looking at Jerry's story now. I was looking it up. If you put a second-round tender on Jaylen Warren, it's not cheap, Chris. I think it's like $5 million a year. And if you put the lower round tender on him, I still think it's around $3 million a year. So it's not cheap to do that with Warren. And maybe, we're speculating here, but maybe they're just going to go year to year with Jaylen Warren and they would draft a guy. So I think in the end, I think in big picture, and again, we'll talk about this for the next couple of months. This is a loaded running backs class. I think the Steelers are going to take one, but we'll see what happens with Naji in free agency, and probably before that, we'll see what happens with Jaylen Warren and what kind of tender does he get, or do they sign Jaylen Warren to a contract and then not Naji Harris? So a lot's going to happen here, I think, in the next month or so. We'll have some clarity probably by the time Combine is over.
The Steelers need some clarity heading into the Combine. But again, free agency doesn't open until mid-March. We'll just keep you updated with what their plans are for the then. Supposedly, the Steelers are going to make moves, or I guess you assume that the Steelers would want to make moves to sign the players that have been on their roster before they hit free agency, so they don't get to that open market. And that's when those numbers go up, because, as Naji Harris may not have been a superstar for the Steelers, but he might be the best free agent running back out there right now when you look at the slim pickings there, and that could up his market and something that he wants to get there. So still a lot of questions as far as if the Steelers will go that direction. We'll keep you close to the information here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone, to the North Shore Drive podcast on this Wednesday episode. We'll be back Friday with more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back here Friday with more on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.